The morning started ordinary. Light through the blinds, the kettle singing readiness, our neighbor's radio faintly arguing about baseball. I was at the gate, running a thumb over the carved initials my kids had scratched into the wood years ago, when a noise sliced the air the way a knife slices cloth, the loud, furious rasp of a chainsaw. I looked up and saw two orange vests, a metal blade spinning like a prescription for panic, and a van idling with the HOA logo stenciled on the side. For a beat the world narrowed down to motor hum, and would dust. Then I was outside, coffee forgotten, and the men in the vests were already cutting through the top hinge. "This is private property," I said. The taller one kept the saw moving like it was a metronome. The shorter man checked a clipboard and smiled as if the paper made him a god. "You can't do this," I said, but my voice felt small against the saw. Phones appeared on porches like compasses, neighbors drawn to the noise. A little girl across the street stood at her mother's ankle, thumb in her mouth, her bear clutched tight. People stood watching, the slow, polite crowd that suburbs perfected, being neither too brave nor too cowardly. I am a veteran. That line explains a lot in quiet ways I don't often talk about. It explains a habit of measuring seconds, of assessing risk before action. Today, the measuring ran fast. I hit record on my phone because we keep records now. Not because we don't trust, but because paper and pixels can remember the truth when committees forget. The taller man barked about unpermitted structure and safety concerns. The saw sang. The gate gave one last unhappy creak and fell open like a mouth without a jaw. The man with the clipboard grabbed the latch to tear it away. For a second my hands rose, an old reflex, a muscle memory from another life, but I kept. Then by my side, pulling a tool from the porch felt like stepping into a different fight. Legal, public, messy. This wasn't the moment to show muscle. It was the moment to make the record clear. So I spoke into the phone. "My name is Mark Harris," I said. "You are on private property. Stop this." The saw spat, and the neighbor with the clipboard muttered about fines. When the men finished, they dragged the gate pieces into a neat pile as if they'd done a civic duty. The little crowd exhaled into the space they'd created by watching. I called the sheriff. The dispatcher said deputies were en route. The men in vests argued that they'd posted notice. No notice was visible. A neighbor's doorbell camera later showed their van at 7:28 a.m. The saw started at 7:32. For anyone paying attention, the story was simple. For the HOA, it was paperwork and a policy sheet that expected people to accept decisions because they were told to. When the deputies arrived, they walked the property, looked at the cut wood, and listened to my recording. The deputy's face shifted from routine to something like concern. He asked the men for their authorization and paperwork. They presented stapled notices and signatures. The deputy squinted, then said plainly, "You do not have the right to destroy someone's private property without their permission." Those words landed like a quiet gavel. The men backed away, their confidence suddenly polite and uncertain. I remember the tiny decisions that lead up to these moments. Leaving the gate a little higher because the neighbor's dog kept hopping over. Choosing a particular stain because it matched the porch trim. laughing with my wife that a freestanding gate would be enough privacy for our kids to scuff their knees, without anyone writing a novelty complaint about curb appeal. Those small, domestic choices are the ones you forget until someone rips them into a pile in your yard, and you see the history laid bare. After the sheriff left with a promise to file a report and maybe interview witnesses, I felt both vindicated and oddly exposed. People stopped by with edible consolation, casseroles, a loaf of banana bread, a Tupperware container of sympathy. The kindness was steady and practical in a way that helped. But the practical stuff, the list, the binder, the calls, had to be done. I learned then that community justice is sometimes a paper war, and veterans are useful at meticulous paper fights. That night my son sat with me on the back steps, and we watched the sun set over the half gate. He didn't ask a lot of questions, just leaned his head against my shoulder and mumbled, "They cut our gate, didn't they, Dad?" I told him yes and explained we were going to make things right. He nodded like a small general and went to bed. In the morning he had taped a hand-drawn flag to the inside of the gate pieces with a bit of string. It was a small, angry banner that made me laugh and cry in the same breath. Asterisk, the first few days after the cut were a blur of small, precise chores: document, photograph, record statements, make copies. I compiled everything into a binder. In it were invoices for the lumber, a letter from the county showing the structure had been grandfathered when the development rules changed, and a photograph of my wife holding a birthday cake by that very gate 10 years earlier. That picture became a kind of evidence in my head, proof that fences are not just wood, but markers of family histories. The HOA's email response was classic committee speak. "We regret any inconvenience. We are reviewing the incident. We maintain community safety." It was the sort of email meant to sound reasonable without admitting fault. I sent a crisp reply with copies of the recording and a demand for the names of anyone who authorized the action. They suggested informal mediation. Their PR line smelled of the same careful distance they had worn in orange vests. Neighbors started to reach out. The woman with the bear had posted her shaky clip to the neighborhood forum, and it had been shared by a neighbor who runs a local page. A retired teacher across the street came over to hand me a stack of postcards from other homeowners who'd been fined for small, arbitrary violations of swing set that needed approval. A decorative stone removed because it disrupted uniformity. Stories pooled. And suddenly my gate was not an isolated grievance, but one tile in a mosaic of small indignities. The binder became a small monument. I labeled tabs with dates and names and made sure there were hard copies in 3 places: my home, my lawyer's office, and the sheriff's locker. Eleanor taught me about the right tone for a demand letter. Crisp, factual, devoid of moralizing, strong on what you expect and what happens if those expectations aren't met. It was odd to be coached on how to be angry without looking like you're simply angry. The legal world demands a particular face for fury. The neighborhood forum that had hosted the bear video became a crucial ledger. People uploaded their own photos and recounted interactions with the patrol. It was instructive in an unsettling way to see how many little slights had been normalized. A woman wrote about an inspector who cited her for a mailbox plant because it didn't match. Another man posted a list of fees he'd been charged over the years for what amounted to taste. Policing. The posts piled up and the board's inbox filled. And suddenly the HOA had a broader problem than a single gate. The HOA scheduled a meeting at the clubhouse. I arrived with my binder and a patient lawyer I'd found through a friend's referral. Her name was Eleanor Park, and she had a way of cutting to the legal marrow without raising her voice. The board arrived in clean shirts and practiced concern. Roger, who'd led the patrol, sat with his clipboard like a man at a job he loved more than the people it affected. I laid out the evidence. I played the recording. I showed the county document that backed my property claims. Washing their faces is a curious thing. People who wielded authority suddenly had to negotiate facts. They shifted in their seats. The treasurer muttered. The president coughed. Roger kept his jaw unusually still. They offered a check for a portion of replacements and an apology. That had been run through 3 drafts. I said no. I wanted transparency and policy changes, not a quiet cash settlement that would let practices continue under other names. The board blinked. They don't usually get told no so plainly, not in their comfortable meeting rooms. When the local paper called asking for a comment, I gave them a clear account. The reporter asked the kinds of human questions that put shape to a story who lived behind that gate. What the gate meant. She ran the story with a photo of the gate pieces catching the daylight like confetti. The headline wasn't incendiary. It was just a fact. Homeowner sues HOA after gate is removed. It landed like a pebble and made ripples across the neighborhood forums and beyond. The viral clip did something strange. It made the HOA's choices visible to people who had no stake, but felt a stake in fairness. An online fundraiser for legal fees collected more than I expected. Not because I wanted money, but because people wanted to be part of making a stand. Donations came with notes. My HOA did the same thing. And this happened to my sister-in-law. It felt like a river swelling with stories that had nowhere else to go. The fundraiser surprised me. People I had never met sent $5 and $10 donations with short messages. Fight the little bullies, one said. A neighbor who runs a modest online store donated $50 and sent a message about standards. A woman in another town wrote that she had been through a similar fight and wanted to make sure we had resources. It was a modest pool, but it mattered because it meant people wanted the association held to account. Under pressure, the board moved. They issued a public apology framed in the careful language of lawyers, but signed by the president. They agreed to fund a replacement gate built by a licensed contractor and to publish the new policy on the association website. Roger resigned from the patrol. Whether he left out of shame or pressure, I don't know. And it doesn't matter as much as what comes next. Roger's exit was quiet. He sent a note saying he was stepping down to spend more time with family. A local columnist speculated publicly that the board had pushed him out to save face. He came by the yard the next week and left a note in our mailbox. saying he was sorry for how things had gone. I read it and felt a thin satisfaction. An acknowledgement maybe, but not a cure for the abrasions of the morning the saw hummed. The day the new gate was installed, it wasn't a dramatic ceremony. The contractor asked if we wanted the old initials carved back in. My daughter insisted, then hesitated, and we decided to carve them below, like a small scar that had healed. The wood smelled of fresh treatment and something else, resilience. Neighbors stopped by with tools to help stain it. The woman with the bear brought a pie. People moved through that afternoon sharing small talk that felt now like a bridge instead of a fence. On the night of the neighborhood forum, where the board announced the policy changes, the clubhouse was full. People came with their stories saved on their phones. The president offered a practiced apology. The treasurer admitted they had delegated too much, and the community signed on to stronger oversight measures. It wasn't dramatic, but it was public, and it mattered. V.